The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on Falcon Air Base, casting razor-sharp shadows beneath the aircraft shelters. Heat waves shimmered off the tarmac like liquid mercury, and the desert wind carried the familiar cocktail of jet fuel and scorched concrete. Ground crews moved in practiced choreography around a lineup of F-16 Fighting Falcons, their movements precise despite the roar of engines overhead. In the middle of this controlled chaos, Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez stepped down from the back of a transport truck, her standard-issue flight suit unmarked by rank insignia or unit patches. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being overlooked, her dark eyes scanning the row of jets with professional interest rather than awe. Maya had spent the last 3 years at smaller bases, flying training missions and transport runs, while other pilots her age were already earning their stripes in combat squadrons. Her file was clean but unremarkable. Solid scores, no disciplinary actions, and a reputation for being dependable but not spectacular. What her file didn't mention was the countless hours she'd spent studying advanced maneuvers, poring over tactical analyses and practicing in simulators long after others had called it a day. Near one of the aircraft, a British pilot named Captain James Razor Williams leaned against equipment, adjusting his gloves with theatrical precision. His reputation preceded him: 3 confirmed kills, multiple commendations, and an ego that filled hangars. When he spotted Maya walking alone across the tarmac, his voice cut through the desert air with casual cruelty. "Oi, someone lose their tour guide?" he called out, not bothering to look directly at her. "She looks like she's here to check the weather reports." Scattered laughter rippled through the ground crew. An American tech sergeant in grease-stained coveralls muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Probably admin here for clipboard duty. Hope she doesn't get lost looking for the supply closet." Maya kept walking, her boots crunching softly on the sand-swept concrete. Her expression remained unchanged, but something flickered behind her eyes. Not anger, but calculation. She'd heard variations of these comments at every base she'd served. The assumption was always the same: quiet meant weak, unassuming meant incompetent. Behind her, the chatter resumed, dismissive and disinterested. She didn't seem to hear it, or maybe she just didn't need to respond, not yet. The briefing tent loomed ahead, larger than it appeared from outside, held up by steel supports and cooled by industrial-grade air conditioning units that barely held off the desert heat. Inside, the air was thick with tension, coffee breath, and the low static of radios. Folding chairs scraped against metal flooring as squadron leaders and tactical analysts settled in for the mission briefing. Maya stepped inside without fanfare, carrying only a flight folder tucked under her arm. The blank badge on her chest drew exactly the kind of glances she expected. Not welcoming, not hopeful, but tolerant at best. She scanned the room quickly, noting the 3 rows of chairs, already half filled with pilots who belonged to established squadrons, tight-knit units with years of shared experience. There were no empty seats in the front rows. No one shifted to make room. Maya remained. Standing near the back, her posture relaxed but alert, like a predator waiting for the right moment. At the far side of the tent, Razor lounged in his chair with practiced arrogance, one boot kicked over the other. His headset hung crooked around his neck, and when he spotted Maya standing alone, his smile curved like a blade. "Look who wandered." "In," he announced to no one in particular. "Admin must have lost the mailroom key again." The comment hung in the air for a moment before someone chuckled. A Belgian pilot leaned toward his wingman and whispered, just loud enough for others to hear, "Is she Observer Corps or just a misfiled translator?" Maya remained motionless, her face a mask of professional composure. She didn't look at anyone directly, instead turning her attention to the tactical board where the simulation parameters were being loaded for the final training event. Her fingers traced the edge of her flight folder, and for just a moment, those who were watching closely might have noticed the slight tightening of her grip. The lead instructor, Major Robert "Tank" Patterson, a grizzled veteran with sun-weathered skin and a permanent limp from an ejection seat malfunction, called the room to attention. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen real combat, not just training exercises. "Alpha Team, Delta Team, Bravo Team," he announced, reading from his tablet. The room shifted with focused attention as call signs were assigned. When he reached the final assignment, his voice caught for just a fraction of a second. Bravo 3. Viper 3. He looked up and spotted Maya in the corner. Someone in the room exhaled audibly, a sound caught between surprise and disbelief. Razor leaned forward, his grin widening. "You're having a laugh," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Viper 3, she's actually flying?" Across the room, a clipboard clattered to the floor as a junior officer tried to hide his smirk. Another pilot whispered, "How fast you think she gets tagged out? 2 minutes, 3 if she remembers which." "Way is up." The instructor made no correction, no defense of the assignment. He simply tapped his screen and moved on, listing flight groups and digital identification numbers as if nothing had happened. Maya stepped quietly to the side table where mission folders were distributed. No one handed her the printed simulation packet. It was nudged toward her corner like a receipt at a diner. She took it, opened it, and began studying the tactical map with the same methodical attention she'd learned to apply to everything in her career. The screen behind the instructor cycled through terrain maps, target designations, and simulated air corridors. No one spoke to her. No one asked if she understood the objectives or needed clarification on the rules of engagement. She was a placeholder, a name on a roster, not a pilot worthy of preparation or concern. As the briefing wrapped up, Razor stood slowly, stretching with theatrical fatigue. "Hope she knows which endpoint's up," he announced to the room. "We're running this simulation in full combat mode, not sightseeing." His comment triggered a wave of barely suppressed laughter, quickly masked behind throat clearing and file shuffling. Maya continued studying her mission packet, her eyes tracking the electronic layout as target coordinates were uploaded to tablets around the room. The roster glowed on the main screen, Bravo 3, Viper 3, her call sign in bold white letters against a blue background. The murmurs resumed, quieter now but still audible. One instructor glanced at her identification chip, frowned slightly, then looked away without comment. As the room began to empty, Razor walked past her station, headset in hand. "Better pray. They don't tag you first, Viper," he said, his tone carrying the false camaraderie of someone about to enjoy a spectacle. "We've got 3 kills waiting and nothing interesting to shoot at yet." Maya's voice came then, low and level, cutting through the ambient noise with surgical precision. "You'll get your chance." Razor paused just long enough to look at her. Again, really look at her. For a moment, something in her expression, not defiance but absolute certainty, checked his impulse to fire off another quip. He gave a small shake of his head and walked on, but the easy confidence in his stride had faltered just slightly. The tent emptied slowly, projection screens dimming as the final pre-flight checks got underway. Maya stood alone for several more seconds, scanning the mission assignments one final time. Then she turned and left through the side flap, her flight folder pressed calmly against her chest, her steps measured and unhurried. The name on the screen remained long after the others. Had faded, Viper 3. The call sign no one knew, belonging to the pilot they would all remember soon enough. Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching evening and the distant sound of engines warming up. Maya walked toward the locker room, her shadow stretching long across the concrete, and for the first time since arriving at Falcon Air Base, she allowed herself a small, almost invisible smile. They thought they knew what they were dealing with. They were about to learn otherwise. The locker room was a tomb of silence, broken only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the methodical sounds of Maya preparing her gear. Dawn hadn't yet breached the horizon, but pale light filtered through the small window near the ceiling, casting long shadows across the metal benches. The air carried the scent of old steel, industrial soap, and the faint tang of jet fuel that seemed to permeate everything on base. Maya moved through her pre-flight routine with practiced precision, each motion deliberate and unhurried. Her helmet sat on the bench beside her, its matte surface marked with the subtle scratches of use. She tightened the chest straps on her flight harness, checking each buckle twice, a habit ingrained through years of flying where a single equipment failure could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. In her open locker, wedged between spare gloves and a sealed packet of emergency supplies, rested a worn photograph. The image showed a man in his 50s, his face weathered but kind, standing beside an F-16 with his arm around a younger Maya. The inscription in the corner read, "To my best student, never let them tell you what's impossible." Colonel David Nash. Maya stared at the photograph for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Nash had been her first instructor, the one who'd seen potential where others saw only determination. He died in a training accident 2 years ago, officially ruled pilot error, though Maya had studied the black box data and found inconsistencies that were never adequately explained. She'd never spoken about her suspicions to anyone. Instead, she'd done what Nash had taught her. She'd studied, prepared, and waited for the right moment to prove what she'd learned. The sound of approaching voices echoed through the corridor, outside. Maya folded the photograph and tucked it into her flight suit pocket, then reached for her helmet. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of conversation. Razor's voice prominent among them. "Bloody waste of a good simulation slot," he was saying. "Could have run a proper training exercise instead of babysitting the admin core." "Maybe she'll wash out early," another voice suggested. "Save us all the embarrassment of watching her fumble through basic maneuvers." Maya's hand paused on her helmet visor. She'd been hoping for a quiet morning, a chance to prepare mentally for what was coming. Instead, she was reminded once again that her presence here was seen as a joke, a diversity checkbox, anything but a legitimate pilot deserving of respect. The voices grew closer, and Maya realized they were heading toward the adjacent prep room. She finished her equipment check and moved toward the door, but stopped when she heard her call sign mentioned directly. "Viper 3!" Razor's voice carried a note of theatrical incredulity. "What kind of name is that for someone who probably can't even hold formation in calm weather?" "Command must be getting desperate," came another voice. She recognized it as belonging to Captain Derek Hawk Morrison, one of Alpha Team's more experienced pilots. Either that, or someone's playing a very expensive practical joke. Maya stepped out of the locker room, her gear bag slung over her shoulder. The conversation stopped abruptly as she appeared in the corridor, but the damage was done. 3 pilots stood clustered near the prep room entrance, their expressions ranging from embarrassment to defiant amusement. "Morning, gentlemen," Maya said evenly, her voice carrying no trace of the tension she felt. "Beautiful day for flying." Razor recovered first, his characteristic smirk sliding back into place. "Indeed it is, Viper. Hope you're ready for some real aviation, not the tourist flights you're probably used to." The comment hit exactly as it was intended, a reference to her service record, which was heavy on transport missions and light on combat training. Maya felt the familiar knot of frustration tighten in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm ready for whatever the simulation throws at us," she replied. "Simulation being the key word," Hawk interjected, his tone dismissive. "It's not like we're flying against real opposition. Should be simple enough even for—" He gestured vaguely. In her direction, the implication clear. Maya stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conversational level that somehow made her words carry more weight. "I appreciate your concern for my capabilities, Captain Morrison. I'm sure the debrief will be educational for all of us." Something in her tone made Hawk's confident expression falter slightly. Razor, however, seemed to sense the shift and stepped forward, reasserting his dominance in the group dynamic. "Tell you what, Viper," he said, his accent making her call sign sound like a joke. "How about we make this interesting? When you inevitably get tagged out in the first 5 minutes, you can explain to the brass why they wasted a perfectly good F-16 on someone who belongs in a transport cockpit." The corridor fell silent. Maya felt the weight of their expectations, their assumptions, their casual dismissal of everything she'd worked for. This was the moment she'd been dreading and preparing for in equal measure, the moment when she had to choose between backing down and standing her ground. "And when I don't get tagged out?" she asked quietly. Razor's laugh was loud and genuine. "When you don't get tagged out? That's rich. All right, I'll play along. If by some miracle you last longer than 5 minutes without getting eliminated, I'll personally recommend you for advanced training. But when you wash out, and you will wash out, You admit you're in over your head and request a transfer back to whatever transport unit was unlucky enough to train you. The other pilots shifted uncomfortably. The challenge had escalated beyond casual hazing into something that felt official, consequential. Maya understood that this wasn't just about her performance in the simulation anymore. It was about her right to be here, to call herself a fighter pilot, to occupy space in a world that had never been designed for someone like her. "Deal," she said without hesitation. Razor's eyebrows shot up. He'd clearly expected her to back down, to find some graceful way to deflect the challenge. Instead, she'd called his bluff, and now they were both committed to a course of action that would have consequences beyond this morning's training exercise. "Brilliant," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I do love a good sporting bet. This should be entertaining." Maya shouldered her gear bag and walked past them toward the hangar exit. "See you up there, gentlemen. Try to keep up." Behind her, she heard Hawk mutter something about attitude problems and Razor's forced laughter. But there was something else in their voices now, uncertainty, perhaps even a hint of worry. They'd expected her to be intimidated, to apologize for her presence, to accept their assessment of her limitations. Instead, she'd thrown down a challenge of her own, and now they were the ones who had to prove something. As Maya walked toward the flight line, the morning sun began to crest the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson. The F-16s sat in their revetments like sleeping predators, their sleek forms promising speed and power to those skilled enough to harness them. Maya approached her assigned aircraft, tail number 847, recently serviced and gleaming under the hangar lights. The crew chief, a veteran sergeant named Rodriguez, looked up from his final inspection. "She's ready to fly, Lieutenant," he said, his tone respectful but neutral. "Full fuel, all systems checked and double-checked. You need anything else?" "Just a clear sky and a fair fight," Maya replied, beginning her own pre-flight inspection. Rodriguez nodded, but as she moved around the aircraft, checking control surfaces and weapon systems, she heard him speak quietly into his radio. "Control. This is Crew 7. Viper 3 is about to launch. Might want to pay attention to this one." Maya pretended not to hear, but the sergeant's words sent a chill down her spine. Word was already spreading about the challenge, the bet, the confrontation that would play out in the simulated skies above the desert. By the time she climbed into the cockpit, half the base would be watching. She'd asked for a fair fight, but fairness had never been something she could count on. What she had instead was preparation, skill, and the memory of an instructor who'd believed in her when no one else would. As she settled into the cockpit and began her startup sequence, Maya whispered a quiet promise to herself. "Don't let them tell you what's impossible." The engines spooled up with a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The simulation loaded with a low rumble through Maya's headset, sinking the artificial terrain to her visual grid. The world around her reformed into sharp-edged mesas, wind-carved canyons, and shimmering thermal columns that rose from the desert floor. Her HUD adjusted for contrast, flickering briefly before locking onto the mission overlay. Targets, friendlies, no-fly zones and boundary lines snapped into place with surgical precision. Maya's call sign blinked in the upper left corner. Viper 3. Below it, her aircraft's status indicators glowed green across the board. The cockpit hummed with the convincing illusion of flight, a blend of cutting-edge technology and digital architecture that made the simulation feel more real than reality itself. In the control room, a dozen monitors displayed multiple perspectives of the exercise. Major Patterson stood at the center console, his weathered hands gripping the edge as he surveyed the tactical display. Around him, instructors and analysts settled into their positions, but the usual pre-mission chatter was subdued. Word of Razor's challenge had spread through the base with the efficiency of a brush fire. "Interesting morning ahead," muttered Chief Warrant Officer Kelly. "The simulation." "Director." Her fingers danced across her keyboard, fine-tuning parameters that would determine whether the exercise was merely challenging or borderline impossible. Patterson nodded grimly. "Let's see what Lieutenant Rodriguez is really made of." The comms. crackled to life as Bravo Team's leader, Captain Torch Williams, issued the first tactical command. "Bravo Flight, form up! Delta spread! Maintain rear coverage!" Maya tapped her input pad twice, acknowledging the order. Her F-16 dropped into position just behind Bravo 2, her sensors scanning the terrain corridor unfolding ahead. The landscape was breathtaking even in simulation, a digital recreation of the Mojave Desert that captured every detail from wind-carved rock formations to the subtle shadows cast by virtual clouds. "Looking good, Bravo 3, came Torch's voice, professional and encouraging. "Stay tight on my wing. We're expecting company in about 60 seconds. Then Razor's voice cut through the channel from Alpha Team's position, his tone carrying the casual confidence of a predator who'd already chosen his prey. "Alpha Team engaging from the ridge. Stay awake, Bravo. Might get bumpy." Within seconds, 2 hostile contacts appeared on Maya's scope. Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 approached from opposite angles, their flight paths spreading like the arms of a net. It was a classic pincer movement designed to force the defensive team into a vulnerable position while limiting their options for counterattack. "Bravo 1, I'm reading multiple contacts," Torch's voice carried a note of urgency. "Evade pattern. 9, pull right hard now!" Maya pulled as instructed, her aircraft banking sharply to maintain formation. Her instruments flared briefly as hostile radar sweeps painted her aircraft, searching for a firing solution. The simulation was designed to be challenging but fair, or so she'd been told. What Maya couldn't see was the conversation taking place in the control room. "Increase the aggressor advantage," Patterson ordered quietly, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise. "Let's see how she handles real pressure." Chief Kelly's fingers hesitated over her keyboard. "Sir, that's outside normal training. Parameters, the exercise is already configured for maximum difficulty. Do it." The change was subtle but immediate. Maya's threat warning system began painting additional contacts that shouldn't have been there, ghost signals designed to confuse and overwhelm. Her radar display started showing false positives, electronic interference that would have been unusual in a standard training exercise. "What the hell?" Bravo 2's voice crackled through the comm. "I'm reading 6 contacts now. That's not right." But Maya was already adapting. Years of flying older aircraft with unreliable systems had taught her to trust her instincts over her instruments. When something didn't feel right, she switched to manual tracking, using visual confirmation and tactical reasoning to separate real threats from electronic phantoms. "Bravo 3, you're drifting," Torch warned. "Tighten up formation." "Negative," Maya replied calmly. "Maintaining tactical spacing for defensive maneuvers." It was a subtle act of insubordination, a decision to trust her own judgment over her flight leader's orders. In the control room, several instructors exchanged glances. Either she was making a critical error that would get her eliminated quickly, or she understood something about the tactical situation that others had missed. Razor's voice cut through the tension. "Tally-ho, Bravo 3, you're looking awfully lonely out there." Maya's threat warning system screamed as a radar lock settled onto her aircraft. But instead of the single lock she'd expected, her display showed 3 separate targeting systems painting her simultaneously. It was impossible. No single aircraft could maintain multiple locks at that angle and distance. "Control, this is Viper 3, Maya's voice remained level despite the chaos surrounding her. "Requesting confirmation of simulation parameters. I'm reading threats that exceed stated exercise conditions." In the control room, Patterson's jaw tightened. "Viper 3, you are cleared to engage per original parameters. Control out." The message was clear. She was on her own, facing conditions that were beyond the scope of normal training, with no support from the exercise controllers. Maya felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same focused detachment she'd experienced during her most difficult flights. When the system was rigged against you, you stopped playing by the system's rules. "Roger, Control," she replied. "Viper 3, engaging." What happened next would be analyzed and debated for years afterward. Instead of following standard defensive protocols, Maya did something that violated every principle of formation flying she'd been taught. She broke hard left, diving toward the canyon floor at an angle that triggered every warning system in her cockpit. "Bravo 3, what are you doing?" Torch's voice carried a note of panic. "You're leaving the formation." "Negative," Maya replied, her voice steady as her aircraft plunged toward the virtual terrain. "I'm taking them with me." Razor's confident. Laughter echoed through the comm channel. "Looks like the pressure got to her, lads. She's diving straight into the deck." "This is going to be over faster than I thought." But Maya wasn't diving into the terrain. She was diving toward it. The distinction would prove crucial in the next few seconds. Her aircraft skimmed the canyon floor at an altitude that triggered every proximity alarm in the simulation. The digital landscape flashed past her cockpit at hundreds of miles per hour, rock formations and ravines blurring into abstract patterns of light and shadow. "Jesus!" breathed one of the instructors in the control room. "She's flying nap of the earth. At that speed in that terrain." "Impossible," muttered another. "One wrong move and she's a smoking crater." But Maya's moves weren't wrong. Every bank, every climb, every subtle adjustment to her flight path was calculated with mathematical precision. She was flying the canyon like she'd been born to it, threading her aircraft through spaces that seemed impossibly narrow, using the terrain itself as both weapon and shield. Above her, Razor's confident pursuit had turned into something closer to panic. "Where is she? I've lost visual contact." "She's not on radar." "She's gone underground," Alpha 2 reported, his voice tight with disbelief. "Below the terrain masking threshold. I can't get a lock." In the control room, the tactical display showed something unprecedented. Maya's aircraft had disappeared from conventional tracking, hidden in the electronic shadow of the virtual canyon walls. Her flight path appeared on the terrain-following radar as a thread of light, weaving through the landscape at impossible speed. "How is she doing that?" Chief Kelly whispered, her eyes fixed on the display. Patterson didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of grudging respect. "She's flying like Nash used to fly, before the accident." The name hung in the air like an accusation. Nash had been legendary for his low-altitude precision flying, but his techniques had been considered too dangerous for standard instruction. After his death, they'd been quietly removed from the curriculum. Apparently, someone had been paying attention before they disappeared. Maya's voice cut through the comm chatter, calm and professional. "Alpha Team, this is Viper 3. You wanted to hunt? Let's hunt." Above the canyon, Razor's aircraft banked frantically as he tried to reacquire his target. "She's bloody insane," he muttered, but his voice carried a note of something that hadn't been there before. For the first time since the exercise began, Razor sounded worried. The canyon walls rose around Maya like the jaws of some ancient predator, their digitally rendered surfaces so detailed she could make out individual rock formations and wind-carved ledges. Her F-16 carved through the narrow passages at speeds that would have been suicidal in real life, but here in the simulation, they were merely impossible. Above her, Razor's team had split into a search pattern, trying to reacquire the target that had vanished into the electronic shadow of the terrain. Their frustrated radio chatter filled the comm channels, a symphony of confusion and growing anxiety. "Control, this is Alpha 1. Razor's voice had lost its earlier cockiness. "I need a position update on Bravo 3. She's gone dark on all sensors." In the control room, Major Patterson stared at the tactical display with a mixture of fascination and concern. Maya's aircraft appeared as a ghostly trail threading through the canyon system, her flight path defying every principle of safe aviation he'd ever learned. "Sir," Chief Kelly's voice was tense, "her G-force readings are off the charts. The simulation is having trouble calculating structural stress at those angles. Can the aircraft handle it?" Patterson asked. "In simulation? Yes. In real life?" Kelly shook her head. "She'd have pulled the wings off 10 minutes ago." But Maya wasn't thinking about structural limitations or safety margins. She was thinking about the lesson Nash had taught her during their last flight together, 2 days before his fatal accident. They'd been practicing low-altitude navigation in a canyon system not unlike this one, and Nash had demonstrated a maneuver that had taken her breath away. "The secret," he'd said afterward, "is not to fight the terrain. Use it. Let it hide you, guide you, teach you. The ground is your ally if you know how to listen to it." She'd never forgotten those words, and now she was putting them into practice. In ways Nash had never imagined, Maya banked hard left following a tributary canyon that would take her behind Alpha Team's position. Her threat warning system had gone quiet. The radar signatures that had been painting her aircraft were blocked by the surrounding terrain. For the first time since the exercise began, she was flying in electronic silence. Alpha 2, Alpha 3, tighten your search pattern, Razor ordered, his voice carrying an edge of desperation. She's got to surface somewhere. She can't stay down there forever. But Maya had no intention of surfacing, not yet. She pulled back on the stick, climbing just enough to clear a ridgeline that would give her a tactical view of the hunting ground above. Her HUD painted the enemy positions in red. 3 aircraft spread in a search pattern, their attention focused on empty sky while their quarry crept up from below. Gotcha, she whispered, her finger moving to the weapon selection switch. The missile lock tone sounded in her headset, pure and clear. Alpha 3, the wingman, had made the mistake of flying straight and level while scanning for threats. He never saw the missile coming from below. Splash 1, Maya announced calmly as the simulation registered the kill. Alpha 3 is off the board. What the bloody hell? Razor's voice exploded through the comm. Where did that come from? Below, Maya replied, her aircraft already diving back into the canyon system. Way below. The control room erupted in quiet chaos. Technicians leaned over their displays, trying to understand how a pilot flying nap of the Earth could achieve a firing solution on a target at medium altitude. The missile tracking data showed an intercept course that seemed to defy physics. Run that back, Patterson ordered. I want to see exactly how she made that shot. The replay showed Maya's aircraft emerging from the canyon like a breaching whale, firing at the peak of her climb, before disappearing back into the terrain masking. The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 seconds, but it demonstrated a level of tactical awareness and precision that left the observers speechless. Nash used to do something similar, one of the older instructors murmured, called it the canyon strike, but he never tried it in a simulation this complex. Above the canyon, Razor's confidence was cracking. The easy target he'd expected to eliminate had turned into something far more dangerous, a predator that could strike from nowhere and vanish like smoke. Alpha 1, Alpha 2, defensive posture, he ordered. Watch the deck. She's coming from below. But Maya wasn't coming from below anymore. She was coming from behind. While Razor's remaining wingman focused on the canyon floor, Maya had used a parallel ravine to circle around their position. She emerged from a blind spot in their sensor coverage, her aircraft climbing at an angle that put her directly behind. Alpha 2, the second missile tone was almost anticlimactic. Splash 2, Maya announced. Alpha 2, you're done. Impossible, Alpha 2's voice cracked with frustration. She was in the canyon. How did she get behind me? By flying better than you, Maya replied, her tone matter-of-fact. Better luck next time. In the control room, the tactical display showed a flight path that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. Maya had navigated a complex canyon system, gained altitude, and achieved perfect firing positions on 2 separate targets without ever exposing herself to effective return fire. She's rewriting the book, Chief Kelly said quietly. Everything we know about defensive tactics, she's turning it inside out. Patterson nodded grimly. And she's not done yet. Above the canyon, Razor found himself alone against an opponent who had just eliminated 2 of his wingmen without taking a single hit in return. The simulation that was supposed to be a simple exercise in formation flying and basic tactics had turned into something far more complex. A deadly game of 3-dimensional chess played at supersonic speeds. All right, Viper 3, Razor's voice carried a note of grudging respect. You've made your point. But now it's just you and me, and I've got altitude advantage. Maya's aircraft climbed out of the canyon system, her sleek form silhouetted against the digital sky. For the first time in the exercise, she was flying in open air, visible to radar, vulnerable to attack. Altitude isn't everything, she replied. Sometimes the high ground is just a better view of your own mistakes. Razor banked hard, trying to get his nose around for a firing solution. His aircraft was faster in a straight line, more maneuverable in open air. Against any normal opponent, the fight would have been over in seconds. But Maya wasn't normal. As Razor committed to his attack run, she did something that would be analyzed in flight schools for years afterward. Instead of trying to outturn him or outclimb him, she simply stopped fighting. Her aircraft seemed to hang in the air for a moment, bleeding speed so rapidly that Razor's targeting system lost lock. His fighter flashed past her position, overshooting by several hundred yards, suddenly vulnerable to attack from behind. "Impossible," Razor breathed. "You can't just stop in mid-air." "Watch me," Maya replied. The third missile tone was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. "Splash 3, she announced. "Game over." In the control room, silence fell like a hammer blow. The tactical display showed the impossible truth. A single pilot flying a standard F-16 had eliminated 3 opponents using techniques that weren't supposed to exist. Major Patterson stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned to his staff. "I want a complete analysis of that engagement. Every maneuver, every decision, every sensor reading. If Lieutenant Rodriguez just invented a new form of air combat, I want to understand it. But understanding would have to wait." In the cockpit of her virtual F-16, Maya began her descent toward the simulated runway, her hands steady on the controls, her breathing calm and controlled. She'd proven her point, but something told her the real battle was just beginning. The simulation ended with the soft chime of mission completion, but the silence that followed was deafening. Maya's aircraft touched down on the virtual runway. With textbook precision, her landing as flawless as everything else she'd demonstrated during the exercise. In the control room, a dozen pairs of eyes stared at displays showing flight paths that seemed to mock conventional wisdom about what was possible in an F-16. Major Patterson was the first to speak, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years. "Of military aviation. Shut it down. Full debrief in Conference Room Alpha in 10 minutes. As technicians began powering down the simulation systems, Maya removed her helmet and ran her fingers through her hair. The cockpit felt suddenly cramped, the silence oppressive after the adrenaline rush of combat. She'd known this moment would come, the moment when she'd have to explain herself, justify her actions, prove that what she'd done was more than just luck or reckless abandon. The walk from the simulator bay to the conference room felt like a march to execution. Maya's boots echoed against the polished floor as she passed clusters of pilots and instructors, their conversations stopping abruptly when they saw her. Word of her performance had spread through the base with remarkable speed, but the reactions were mixed. Some faces showed grudging respect, others skepticism, and a few displayed barely concealed hostility. Razor was waiting outside the conference room, his flight suit still damp with sweat, his expression unreadable. When he saw Maya approaching, he stepped forward, blocking her path. "That was quite a show," he said, his accent making the words sound like an accusation. "Mind telling me where you learned to fly like that?" Maya met his gaze steadily. "Same place you learned to lose, I imagine. Practice." The comment hit home, and Razor's jaw tightened. "Those maneuvers you pulled, half of them aren't even in the training manual. The other half are explicitly forbidden for safety reasons." "Maybe that's why they work," Maya replied. "Hard to defend against something you've never seen before." Before Razor could respond, the conference room door opened, and Major Patterson appeared. His weathered face was grim, his eyes moving. Between the two pilots, with the calculating gaze of someone trying to solve a complex equation, "Lieutenant Rodriguez, Captain Williams, inside, now." The conference room was sterile and intimidating, with white walls lined with commendation plaques and photographs of distinguished aviators. A large monitor dominated one wall, currently displaying the final frame of Maya's simulation. Her aircraft in perfect formation with empty sky where 3 opponents had been moments before. Patterson took his seat at the head of the conference table, flanked by Chief Kelly and 2 other senior instructors Maya didn't recognize. The setup felt more like a court-martial than a debrief, and she wondered if her demonstration had backfired. Spectacularly. "Take a seat, both of you," Patterson ordered. "We need to discuss what just happened out there." Maya and Razor sat on opposite sides of the table, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Patterson activated the monitor, and Maya's flight path appeared as a three-dimensional trace overlaid on the canyon terrain. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Patterson began, his voice carefully neutral, "in 12 years of running combat simulations, I've never seen anything like what you just demonstrated. I need you to explain to me how a transport pilot with no advanced combat training just eliminated 3 experienced fighter pilots using techniques that aren't taught at any flight school in the world." Maya had prepared for this moment, but sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights with multiple pairs of hostile eyes fixed on her, she felt her mouth go dry. This was her chance to prove that what she'd done was skill, not luck. But it was also her chance to expose herself as something the military wasn't sure it wanted. "Sir," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I've been studying advanced tactical maneuvers for the past 3 years. Much of what I demonstrated today is based on techniques developed by Colonel David Nash before his death." The name dropped into the room like a grenade. Patterson's expression didn't change, but Chief Kelly leaned forward sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Nash's techniques were classified and removed from active training protocols," Kelly said. "How did you gain access to classified material?" "I didn't," Maya replied. "Colonel Nash was my instructor during flight school. He taught me personally, off the books, during evening sessions. He said conventional tactics were becoming predictable, and that future conflicts would require pilots who could think outside established parameters." Patterson studied her for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. Nash was brilliant, but he was also reckless. His death was attributed to pushing the envelope too far. "Are you telling me you've been practicing techniques that killed one of our best pilots?" "I'm telling you that I've been perfecting techniques that Nash never had the chance to finish developing," Maya said. "What killed Colonel Nash wasn't the maneuver itself. It was equipment failure during a weather system that shouldn't have been flyable. I've studied the accident reports, sir." "Every one of them?" Razor shifted in his seat, his expression skeptical. "Convenient excuse. The man's dead and can't contradict your story." Maya turned to face him directly, her calm demeanor finally showing cracks. "Captain Williams, with respect, you just got outflown by someone you considered incompetent. Maybe the problem isn't my story, maybe it's your assumptions." "Enough," Patterson cut in before Razor could respond. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, I want you to understand something. What you demonstrated today was extraordinary, but it was also dangerous. Those maneuvers you performed, if attempted in real aircraft, would likely result in catastrophic failure and loss of life." "Would they, sir?" Maya asked quietly. She reached into her flight suit and withdrew a small tablet, setting it on the table. "I've run computational analyses on every maneuver I performed today. Stress factors, G-force loads, structural tolerances. The F-16 can handle everything I did, provided the pilot has sufficient skill and preparation." Chief Kelly reached for the tablet, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the data. "These calculations? This level of analysis? Where did you learn to do this?" "I taught myself," Maya said. "Engineering degree from MIT before I joined the service. I've been modeling advanced flight dynamics as a hobby for years." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Maya wasn't just a pilot with unusual skills. She was an engineer who had systematically analyzed and improved upon techniques that had been abandoned by conventional wisdom. Patterson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Lieutenant, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Do you believe you could teach these techniques to other pilots?" Maya felt her heart rate spike. This was the moment she'd been working toward for 3 years, the chance to prove that Nash's vision of next-generation aerial combat wasn't just possible, but necessary. "Yes, sir," she said without hesitation, "but it would require completely restructuring how we think about fighter-pilot training. Conventional tactics assume that aircraft will engage at medium to high altitude in relatively open airspace. Future conflicts are likely to involve complex terrain, electronic warfare, and opponents who don't follow established engagement protocols." "You're talking about rewriting doctrine that's been successful for decades," one of the unnamed instructors interjected. I'm talking about adapting to reality, Maya replied. Sir, every conflict in the past 20 years has shown that enemies who can't match us technologically will find ways to negate our advantages. They'll use terrain, weather, and unconventional tactics to even the odds. We need pilots who can respond to those threats. Razor had been silent during this exchange, but now he leaned forward. And you think you're the one to train them? A transport pilot with delusions of grandeur? Maya turned to him with a smile that was sharp as a blade. Captain, you just spent 20 minutes trying to find me in a canyon system while I systematically eliminated your entire flight. Maybe the question isn't whether I'm qualified to train new pilots. Maybe it's whether you're qualified to train with them. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. Razor half rose from his chair, his face flushed with anger, but Patterson's voice cut through the confrontation like a knife. Sit down, Captain Williams. Patterson's tone brooked no argument. Lieutenant Rodriguez, you've made your point. The question now is what we do with this information. Maya sensed an opportunity and pressed forward. Sir, I'd like to request permission to develop a formal training protocol based on Nash's techniques. Give me 6 months and a handful of volunteer pilots, and I'll show you what's possible when we stop limiting ourselves to what's always been done. Absolutely not, Chief Kelly said immediately. The liability alone would be enormous. One mistake, one miscalculation, and we'd have dead pilots and congressional hearings. We already have dead pilots, Maya replied quietly. Colonel, Nash died because he was working alone, without support, without resources. How many more talented aviators are we going to lose because we're afraid to evolve? Patterson stood slowly, his decision made. Lieutenant Rodriguez, you've given me a lot to think about. I'm not prepared to authorize any new training protocols at this time, but I am prepared to do something else. He moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a thick folder, setting it on the table between them. This contains Nash's complete research files, including materials that were classified after his death. I'm granting you temporary access, under supervision, to conduct a full analysis of his work. Maya's breath caught. She'd been hoping for permission to train a few pilots. Instead, she was being given access to Nash's legendary research, the theoretical foundation that had made him one of the most innovative pilots of his generation. Sir, Thank you. This is more than I hoped for. Don't thank me yet, Patterson warned. You'll have Chief Kelly looking over your shoulder every step of the way, and you'll present your findings to a review board that will include some very skeptical officers. If you can't prove that Nash's techniques are both effective and safe, this conversation ends here. Understood, sir. Patterson turned to Razor, whose expression had darkened considerably. Captain Williams, I believe you had a wager with Lieutenant Rodriguez. Something about advanced training recommendations? Razor's jaw worked silently for several seconds before he managed to speak. She lasted longer than 5 minutes, he admitted grudgingly. I'll honor my commitment. Good. You'll also be assigned as Lieutenant Rodriguez's primary test pilot during her research phase. Consider it an opportunity to learn something new. The color drained from Razor's face. Sir, with respect, I don't recall asking what you think, Captain. You challenged Lieutenant Rodriguez's competence publicly, and she responded by demonstrating capabilities that exceed your own. Now you'll help her prove whether those capabilities can be replicated safely. Maya watched Razor struggle with the implications. He'd gone from predator to prey in the space of a single conversation, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Any questions? Patterson asked. Maya had 1,000 questions, but only one that mattered. When do we start? Tomorrow. Morning, 0600 hours. Don't be late. Patterson stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Dismissed. As the room cleared, Maya remained seated for a moment, staring at the folder containing Nash's research. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment, the chance to prove that her mentor's vision hadn't died with him. Behind her, she heard Razor's voice, quiet but carrying clearly in the empty room. I hope you know what you're doing, Rodriguez, because if you're wrong about this, people are going to die. Maya turned to face him, her expression serious but determined. Captain Williams, people are already dying. The question is whether we're going to let them die using outdated tactics or give them the tools they need to survive what's coming. She picked up Nash's folder and walked toward the door, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new skeptics, and new opportunities to prove that the impossible was simply another word for unprecedented. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Maya felt like she was finally flying in the right direction. The secure briefing room hummed with the low whir of climate control systems as Maya spread Colonel Nash's research files across the polished conference table. Dawn light filtered through reinforced windows, casting geometric shadows across documents that had been classified for 2 years. Chief Kelly sat across from her, a cup of coffee cooling forgotten at her elbow, her expression shifting between fascination and concern as she reviewed Nash's theoretical work. "This is incredible," Kelly murmured, tracing a finger along a complex diagram showing 3-dimensional flight paths through urban terrain. He was modeling combat scenarios that won't exist for another decade. Maya nodded, pulling up a digital file on her tablet. Nash believed that future air combat would be fought in increasingly complex environments. Urban warfare, electronic jamming, enemies using civilian infrastructure as cover. Traditional high-altitude engagements would become obsolete. And you think his techniques address these scenarios? I know they do. Maya activated a simulation program she'd been developing in her spare time. I've been running models based on his research for the past 2 years. Look at this. Siast. The tablet displayed a 3-dimensional urban environment, a digital recreation of a Middle Eastern city complete with high-rise buildings, narrow streets, and civilian air traffic corridors. Red dots indicated hostile aircraft using the urban canyon as cover, while blue icons showed friendly forces attempting to engage. Conventional tactics call for drawing the enemy into open airspace where our technological advantages are decisive, Maya explained, manipulating the display to show different engagement scenarios. But what happens when the enemy refuses to cooperate? When they stay low, use buildings as cover, blend with civilian traffic? Kelly leaned forward, studying the simulation. Our pilots would be forced to operate in an environment they've never trained for, using tactics that prioritize speed and altitude over precision and adaptability. Exactly. Now watch this. Maya ran the simulation again, but this time the friendly aircraft employed Nash's low-altitude techniques, weaving through the urban landscape with serpentine precision. The engagement that had favored the enemy in the first scenario now shifted dramatically, with hostile aircraft eliminated before they could effectively use their urban cover. The difference is striking, Kelly admitted, but Maya, you have to understand, this is all theoretical. We have no real-world data to support these techniques. Before Maya could respond, the briefing room door opened and Major Patterson entered, followed by an officer Maya didn't recognize. The newcomer was a tall, stern-faced woman with the silver eagles of a full colonel on her shoulders and the bearing of someone accustomed to having her orders followed without question. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, Chief Kelly," Patterson said formally, "I'd like you to meet Colonel Rebecca Stone from Pentagon Air Combat Development. She's here to observe your research and provide perspective." Maya felt her stomach drop. Pentagon involvement meant political implications, budget considerations, and layers of bureaucracy that could strangle her project before it truly began. Colonel Stone's expression suggested she was already skeptical about what she was going to see. "Colonel Stone," Maya said, standing and offering a respectful salute. "I'm honored by your presence, ma'am." Stone returned the salute crisply. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, I've reviewed your service record and the reports from yesterday's simulation. Impressive performance, though I understand the exercise parameters were unusual." The comment carried a subtle accusation that Maya's success had been the result of favorable conditions rather than genuine skill. Maya felt her defensive instincts activate, but forced herself to remain professional. "Ma'am, I'd be happy to demonstrate the techniques under any parameters you consider appropriate. The effectiveness isn't dependent on specific conditions. It's based on fundamental principles of 3-dimensional maneuvering." "We'll see." Stone moved to the table where Nash's files were spread out, her eyes scanning the documents with professional interest. "These are Colonel Nash's original research notes?" "Yes, ma'am," Kelly confirmed. "Lieutenant Rodriguez has been conducting analysis to determine whether Nash's theoretical work can be translated into practical training protocols." Stone picked up one of the files, a detailed study of ground effect aerodynamics that Nash had been developing before his death. Her expression darkened as she read. "Colonel Nash was a brilliant pilot," Stone said carefully, "but his final project was terminated for good reason. The techniques he was developing were considered too dangerous for operational use." Maya felt anger rise in her throat but kept her voice level. "Ma'am, with respect, those techniques were never fully tested. Colonel Nash died in an accident that had nothing to do with the maneuvers themselves. It was equipment failure during a storm system that grounded all other aircraft. The accident investigation concluded that Nash was pushing his aircraft beyond safe operational limits," Stone replied. "The fact that equipment failed under those conditions validates the decision to classify his research. Or it suggests that the equipment wasn't designed for the performance levels Nash was achieving," Maya countered. "Ma'am, I've run extensive computer models on every technique Nash developed. The F-16 can handle the stress loads, provided the pilot has sufficient training and preparation." Stone set down the file and fixed Maya with a stare that could have melted steel. "Lieutenant, I'm going to be direct with you. The Pentagon has concerns about this research, not just safety concerns, strategic concerns. If these techniques are as effective as you claim, they represent a significant shift in air combat doctrine. That kind of change has implications far beyond pilot training." Maya felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd been so focused on proving the technical validity of Nash's work that she hadn't fully considered the political ramifications. If her techniques worked, they would invalidate billions of dollars in training infrastructure and decades of established doctrine. "Ma'am, I understand that change is difficult, but change is expensive," Stone interrupted. "Retraining every fighter pilot in the military, redesigning training facilities, updating operational procedures. We're talking about a cost measured in the billions. The Pentagon needs to be very certain that such an investment is justified," Chief Kelly cleared her throat diplomatically. "Colonel Stone, perhaps we should focus on the technical evaluation first. If the techniques prove ineffective, the cost considerations become moot." "Agreed." Stone turned back to Maya. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, you have 1 week to prepare a comprehensive demonstration. I want to see these techniques performed by multiple pilots under realistic combat conditions. If you can prove they're both effective and teachable, we'll consider expanded testing." Maya's heart raced. 1 week to prove everything she'd been working toward for 3 years. "Ma'am, I'll need access to additional pilots for training. Captain Williams has been assigned, but I'll need at least 3 more volunteers to demonstrate scalability." "You'll have 2, Stone said flatly, "and they won't be volunteers. They'll be pilots specifically chosen to test the limits of your techniques. If your methods can't work with skeptical students, they won't work in operational conditions." The message was clear. Maya would be working with pilots who had been instructed to find flaws in her approach, to push her techniques to failure. It was a setup designed to expose weaknesses rather than validate strengths. "Understood, ma'am. May I ask who will be participating in the evaluation?" Stone smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Captain Williams you already know. You'll also be working with Captain Jennifer Ghost Harris, one of our top-rated aggressor pilots, and Captain Marcus Blade Thompson from the Air Force Weapons School. Both have been briefed on the strategic importance of this evaluation." Maya knew both names by reputation. Harris was known for her analytical approach to combat flying and her ability to exploit even microscopic weaknesses in an opponent's technique. Thompson was a weapons school graduate with a reputation for aggressive flying and skepticism toward anything that deviated from established doctrine. They weren't just skeptical students, they were professional devil's advocates, chosen specifically to prove that Maya's techniques were impractical, dangerous, or both. "When do we begin?" Maya asked. "Tomorrow morning, 500 hours, Patterson replied. "You'll have full access to the simulation systems and limited access to actual aircraft for validation flights. Chief Kelly will monitor all activities for safety." "Compliance." And Lieutenant Rodriguez, Stone added, her voice carrying an unmistakable warning. I want to be very clear about the stakes here. If this evaluation goes well, you may find yourself at the forefront of a revolution in air combat. Training. If it goes poorly, you'll likely find yourself back in a transport squadron, and Nash's research will be permanently sealed. Maya felt the weight of 3 years of preparation settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about proving her own competence anymore. It was about validating Nash's legacy and potentially changing the course of military aviation. I understand, ma'am. I won't let you down. Stone gathered her papers and headed for the door. Lieutenant, the only person you need to worry about letting down is yourself. The Pentagon will make its decision based on results, not intentions. After Stone left, the briefing room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Maya stared at Nash's research files, wondering if she'd bitten off more than she could chew. Maya, Kelly said quietly, you know this is an almost impossible task, right? 3 skeptical pilots, 1 week of training, and a Pentagon observer who's clearly hoping you'll fail? Maya picked up one of Nash's theoretical diagrams, a complex study of energy management during vertical maneuvering. Her mentor's handwriting filled the margins with notes and calculations, the passionate work of someone who believed in pushing boundaries. Chief, Nash once told me that impossible was just another word for unpracticed. He spent years developing these techniques because he believed the next generation of pilots would need them to survive. She looked up at Kelly, her expression determined. I'm not going to let politics and bureaucracy bury his work. Those pilots they're sending me? They think they're going to prove me wrong. Instead, I'm going to turn them into believers. Kelly studied Maya's face and saw something that reminded her of Nash himself. An absolute conviction that the impossible was simply a challenge waiting to be conquered. All right, Kelly said, closing her laptop. Let's see if you can work. Miracles. Outside the briefing room, the morning sun was climbing higher, and the sound of jet engines warming up echoed across the base. Maya had 6 days to transform 3 skeptical fighter pilots into advocates for a revolutionary approach to air combat. The countdown had begun. The simulation facility hummed with tension as Maya made final adjustments to the combat scenario. Parameters. 6 days of intensive training had transformed the sterile briefing room into a war room filled with flight data, tactical analyses, and the accumulated debris of countless hours of preparation. Coffee cups and energy drink cans lined the tables, testament to the marathon sessions that had pushed both instructor and students to their limits. Captain Jennifer Ghost Harris stood near the main display, studying the 3-dimensional terrain map with the focused intensity that had made her one of the military's most effective aggressor pilots. Her initial skepticism had gradually given way to grudging respect as Maya's techniques had proven themselves in simulation after simulation. This is unlike anything I've ever seen, Ghost murmured, tracing a finger along a complex flight path that wove through urban terrain. The spatial awareness required, the precision timing, it's like learning to think in 4 dimensions. Captain Marcus Blade Thompson was less enthusiastic, though his resistance had cracked considerably over the past week. It works in simulation, he admitted, his arms crossed as he reviewed telemetry data from their latest training run. But simulation and reality are different animals. One miscalculation at these speeds in this terrain, and you're painting the landscape. Maya looked up from her tablet where she'd been running final stress calculations on the maneuvers they would demonstrate for Colonel Stone. Blade, you said the same thing 3 days ago about the inverted canyon run. Yesterday you executed it flawlessly in the simulator. Simulator being the key word, Thompson replied. Today we're flying real aircraft with real consequences. The briefing room door opened, and Major Patterson entered, followed by Colonel Stone and a small entourage of Pentagon observers. Stone's expression was unreadable, but Maya caught the subtle tension in her posture, the bearing of someone preparing to witness either a breakthrough or a disaster. Ladies and gentlemen, Patterson announced, we're ready to begin the final evaluation. Lieutenant Rodriguez, you have the floor. Maya stood, feeling the weight of 3 years of preparation and Nash's legacy settling on her shoulders. The next hour would determine whether revolutionary techniques would transform military aviation or disappear forever into classified archives. Colonel Stone distinguished observers, Maya began, her voice steadied despite the adrenaline coursing. Through her system, today's demonstration will consist of 3 phases. First, a baseline engagement using conventional tactics. Second, the same scenario using Nash's integrated maneuvering techniques. Finally, a complex multi-threat environment designed to test adaptability and scalability. Stone nodded curtly. Proceed. The first phase unfolded exactly as Maya had predicted. Conventional high-altitude engagements, textbook formations, and by-the-book tactics that had served the military well for decades. The simulated enemy forces, programmed with advanced AI and electronic warfare capabilities, systematically dismantled the friendly aircraft using terrain masking and coordinated attacks. As you can see, Maya explained as the simulation ended, with friendly forces eliminated, conventional tactics assume air superiority and relatively open engagement parameters. Against adaptive enemies using complex terrain and advanced countermeasures, these approaches become predictably vulnerable. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. He'd been one of the friendly pilots eliminated in the simulation, his aircraft falling victim to a surface-to-air missile he never saw coming. Phase 2, Maya announced, resetting the simulation. Same scenario, same enemy capabilities, integrated maneuvering protocols. What happened next would be studied in military academies for decades. Ghost's aircraft disappeared into a river valley using Nash's terrain-following techniques to approach undetected. Blade executed a perfect canyon strike, eliminating 2 enemy aircraft before they could achieve radar lock. Razor, who had spent the week grudgingly learning to trust Maya's methods, emerged from behind a mountain ridge to deliver the killing blow to the remaining threats. The simulation ended with all friendly aircraft intact and mission objectives achieved. "Impossible!" breathed one of the Pentagon observers. "The tactical advantage is overwhelming." Colonel Stone's expression remained carefully neutral, but Maya caught the slight widening of her eyes as the implications sank in. "Impressive, Lieutenant Rodriguez, but simulation scenarios can be programmed to favor specific approaches. I'm more interested in how these techniques perform under unpredictable conditions." "That's what Phase 3 is designed to test," Maya replied, calling up the final scenario. "Complex urban environment, multiple threats, civilian air traffic, an adaptive enemy AI that will learn and counter our tactics in real time." The third simulation was chaos incarnate. Enemy fighters mixed with civilian aircraft, surface-to-air missiles launched from concealed positions, and electronic jamming that turned sophisticated sensors into expensive decoration. It was the kind of environment that would test every principle. Maya had learned from Nash's research. Ghost's voice crackled through the comm as she threaded her aircraft between skyscrapers, using the urban canyon to mask her approach. "Viper 3, I have multiple contacts bearing 270 there, using the hospital complex as cover." "Copy, Ghost. Blade, can you get elevation on the eastern approach?" "Negative. Too much civilian traffic. I'm going low, following the river corridor." Maya watched the tactical display as her pilots adapted Nash's techniques to challenges they'd never trained for. The rigid doctrine of conventional air combat gave way to fluid improvisation, 3-dimensional thinking that turned the complex environment from obstacle into weapon. "Surface-to-air launch bearing 095, Razor's voice carried urgent warning as enemy missiles streaked toward the formation. But Maya's pilots were no longer where conventional tactics said they should be. Ghost rolled inverted beneath a highway overpass, using the concrete structure as a shield. Blade climbed vertically along the face of a skyscraper, the missile. Losing lock as it tried to follow an impossible trajectory, Razor simply disappeared into a subway tunnel entrance, emerging seconds later behind the missile battery. The engagement lasted 8 minutes. When it ended, all enemy forces had been eliminated with 0 friendly casualties, despite facing overwhelming odds in complex terrain. The briefing room fell silent except for the hum of cooling electronics. Colonel Stone stared at the tactical display showing the impossible flight paths her pilots had just executed, her professional composure finally cracking. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," she said quietly, "in 25 years of military aviation, I have never seen anything like what you just demonstrated. These techniques don't just provide tactical advantage, They represent a fundamental evolution in air combat capability. Maya felt her heart racing, but kept her voice steady. Mom, this is only the beginning. What you've seen today is 3 pilots with 1 week of training. Imagine what's possible with dedicated schools, specialized equipment, and systematic development. The strategic implications are staggering, one of the Pentagon observers murmured. If hostile forces develop similar capabilities, they won't, Maya interrupted, her confidence absolute. These techniques require a level of training integration and technological support that takes years to develop. We have a window of opportunity to establish decisive advantage, but only if we act quickly. Colonel Stone stood slowly, her decision made. Lieutenant Rodriguez, I'm recommending immediate approval for a full-scale development program. Nash's research will be declassified and integrated into advanced training curricula. You'll be promoted to major and assigned as director of the new Advanced Maneuvering Division. The room erupted in quiet congratulations, but Maya barely heard them. She was thinking about Nash, about the vision he'd died pursuing, about the legacy that had almost been buried in classified files. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Colonel Nash would be proud." "I think he would," Stone agreed. "But Maya, and I hope you don't mind the informality, this is just the beginning. What you've created here will change everything. The question is whether we're ready for that change." Maya looked around the room at the faces of the people who had witnessed the impossible becoming inevitable. Ghost and Blade wore expressions of converts, pilots who had seen the future of their profession. Razor nodded at her with genuine respect, the animosity of their first meeting replaced by professional admiration. "Ma'am," Maya said, "we've been ready for this change for years. We just needed someone willing to take the first step." Outside the briefing room, the afternoon sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, an F-16 climbed toward the endless sky, its pilot practicing maneuvers that would have been considered impossible just 1 week ago. The revolution had begun, and Maya Rodriguez was leading it. 6 months later, the Advanced Maneuvering Training Facility occupied a sprawling complex of hangars, simulation bays, and classrooms that had been constructed with remarkable speed. Once Pentagon funding was approved, Major Maya Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the primary training hangar, watching as a new class of students attempted their first canyon runs under the watchful eyes of instructors who had once dismissed her as a transport pilot with delusions of grandeur. Below, Captain Ghost Harris guided a nervous lieutenant through the intricacies of terrain following flight, her voice calm and encouraging over the radio. "Remember, the ground is your ally. Don't fight it. Flow with it. Trust your instincts. As much as your instruments," Maya smiled, recognizing her own words being passed on to a new generation. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Ghost had become one of the program's most effective instructors, her analytical mind perfectly suited to breaking down Nash's complex theories into teachable segments. Blade Thompson had initially resisted the assignment but had evolved into a specialist in urban combat scenarios, developing techniques that even Maya found innovative. The door behind her opened, and Colonel Stone entered the observation deck, her expression thoughtful as she surveyed the training activity below. "The congressional hearing went well," Stone reported. "Full funding approval for expansion to all major air bases. The Joint Chiefs are convinced that Nash's techniques represent the future of air superiority." Maya nodded, but her attention was drawn to a familiar figure entering the hangar below. Razor Williams had just returned from a deployment in Eastern Europe, where his unit had been the first to employ the new techniques in actual combat operations. The mission details remained classified, but Maya had heard enough to know that her methods had proven themselves under real-world conditions. "Any word on operational results?" Maya asked. Stone's smile was answer enough. "Let's just say that certain hostile air forces have been asking some very pointed questions about how their aircraft keep disappearing from radar without any conventional air-to-air engagements being detected." Through the observation window, Maya watched as Razor approached one of the simulators, his flight suit bearing new mission patches that told their own story. He'd gone from her harshest critic to one of her most effective ambassadors, and the irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Maya," Stone said, using the informality that had become comfortable between them, I have something for you." She handed Maya a sealed envelope bearing the Pentagon's official seal. Inside was a letter of commendation signed by the Secretary of Defense, but more importantly, it contained authorization for something Maya had been requesting for months. "The Nash Memorial Flight Research Center," Maya read aloud, her voice catching slightly. "Construction begins next month," Stone confirmed, "a dedicated facility for developing next-generation air combat techniques with you as the commanding officer. Your mentor's name will be on the building where his vision finally becomes reality." Maya felt tears threatening, but maintained her composure. The weight of Nash's death had never fully left her, the sense that his revolutionary ideas had died with him in that training accident. Now his legacy would live on in brick and steel, inspiring new generations of pilots to push beyond the boundaries of what was considered possible. "There's something else," Stone continued. "The investigation into Nash's accident has been reopened. New evidence suggests that the equipment failure wasn't random. There are indications of sabotage, possibly by parties who wanted his research buried." Maya's blood went cold. "Sabotage? We're still investigating, but it appears that certain defense contractors were concerned about the impact Nash's techniques might have on their existing training systems. If proven, there will be criminal charges." The revelation cast Nash's death in an entirely new light. He hadn't died because he was reckless or pushing too hard. He'd been murdered by people who saw his innovation as a threat to their profits. "I want to be involved in the investigation," Maya said, her voice hard. "I expected you would. The case files will be available to you once the facility is operational." Below them, the training session was winding down. The nervous lieutenant had successfully completed his first canyon run, his aircraft emerging from the simulated terrain with textbook precision. Maya watched Ghost congratulate the young pilot and felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was Nash's true legacy, not just the techniques themselves, but the transformation of military aviation from rigid doctrine to adaptive innovation. Every pilot who learned to think beyond conventional limitations was a vindication of his vision. "Maya," Stone said quietly, "I want you to know that what you've accomplished here goes beyond military applications. The techniques you've developed are already being adapted for civilian aviation, search and rescue operations, even space program applications. You've changed more than just air combat. You've changed how we think about flight itself." Maya turned away from the observation window to face Stone directly. "Colonel, with respect, I didn't change anything. I just refused to let good ideas die with the people who created them." "That's exactly what makes the difference," Stone replied. "Too many revolutionary concepts get buried by bureaucracy, politics, or simple institutional inertia. You fought for Nash's work when everyone else was ready to forget it." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Razor appeared on the observation deck, still wearing his flight gear from the morning's training session. His expression was serious but respectful, a far cry from the arrogant pilot who had challenged Maya 6 months earlier. "Major Rodriguez," he said formally, then relaxed into a more casual tone. "Maya, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For proving me wrong." Razor moved to the window, watching as another group of students prepared for their afternoon session. I've been flying fighters for 12 years, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about air combat. You showed me I knew nothing." Maya studied his profile, noting the changes that had transformed him from antagonist to ally. The fierce, cocky arrogance had been replaced by hard-earned wisdom, the casual cruelty by genuine respect for innovation. "James," she said, using his first name for the first time, "you weren't wrong about everything. You were right that these techniques are dangerous. They require absolute precision and complete commitment. What you were wrong about was thinking. That made them impossible." Razor nodded thoughtfully. "The deployment taught me something else too. In real combat, against real enemies using real terrain and real desperation, conventional tactics get people killed. Your methods, Nash's methods, they save lives." Colonel Stone cleared her throat diplomatically. "Gentlemen, ladies, I hate to interrupt this moment of professional bonding, but we have visiting dignitaries arriving this afternoon. Representatives from our NATO allies want to see what all the fuss is about." Maya felt a familiar flutter of nerves. International interest meant global implications, the possibility that Nash's vision would spread far beyond American military aviation. It also meant more scrutiny, more pressure, and more opportunities for things to go wrong. Any specific concerns I should be aware of? Maya asked. The usual, Stone replied. Cost, safety, strategic balance. Some of our allies are worried that these techniques could destabilize existing air power relationships. Others are worried about the training requirements and infrastructure investments. Through the observation window, Maya could see maintenance. Crews preparing the demonstration aircraft for the afternoon's exhibition. Everything had to be perfect, not just the flying, but the presentation, the explanation, the careful balance between revelation and restraint. Maya, Razor said quietly, there's something else you should know. Word is spreading through the pilot community faster than official channels can manage. There are requests for training slots from every major air force in the world. Some of them aren't coming through diplomatic channels. Maya frowned. What do you mean? Private contractors, foreign governments, even some groups that make our intelligence services nervous. Nash's techniques represent a force multiplier that could change regional power balances overnight. Not everyone asking for access has friendly intentions. The implications hit Maya like a cold wind. She'd been so focused on proving Nash's vision that she hadn't fully considered the consequences of success. Revolutionary air combat techniques in the wrong hands could destabilize entire regions, tip the balance of conflicts that had been carefully managed for decades. That's exactly why we need to maintain strict control over the program, Stone said firmly. This technology stays within trusted allied forces under carefully monitored conditions. The last thing we need is these techniques being used against us. Maya nodded, but part of her felt the familiar weight of responsibility that had driven Nash to work in isolation. How do you balance innovation with security? How do you share knowledge without losing control of it? The sound of approaching aircraft drew their attention back to the window. A formation of F-16s was approaching the field, their flight path demonstrating some of the basic maneuvers that had become standard in the advanced training curriculum. To casual observers, it looked like routine formation flying. To trained eyes, it was poetry in motion, aircraft moving in three-dimensional harmony that pushed the boundaries of what had been considered possible. Colonel Stone, Maya said slowly, I have a request. I'm listening. I want to establish an exchange program with our closest allies, bring their best pilots here for training, send our instructors to their facilities, but I also want to create a research partnership. Ongoing development of Nash's techniques with input from pilots who face different types of threats in different environments. Stone considered this. That would require unprecedented levels of cooperation and information sharing. The bureaucratic challenges alone would be enormous. But the strategic advantages would be enormous too, Maya countered. These techniques work because they're adaptable, because they respond to unexpected situations with innovative solutions. The more diverse perspectives we can incorporate, the more robust the final product becomes. Razor smiled. You're talking about turning Nash's research into a living, evolving doctrine instead of a fixed set of procedures. Exactly. Nash always said that the moment you stop learning, you start dying. The same is true for tactical systems. Colonel Stone was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the aircraft conducting their demonstration below. Finally, she nodded slowly. I'll take it to the Joint Chiefs. No promises, but the idea has merit. International cooperation on this scale would be complex, but it might also be necessary. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the hangar windows, painting the training facility in golden light. Maya thought about Nash, about the photograph in her locker, about the promise she'd made to herself 6 months ago. She'd proven that his techniques worked, but more than that, she'd proven that innovation could survive institutional resistance if someone was willing to fight for it. Major Rodriguez, Stone said formally, in recognition of your exceptional service and the strategic importance of your research, you're being promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, effective immediately. Congratulations. Maya felt the weight of new responsibility settling on her shoulders, but also a sense of completion. She'd kept faith with Nash's memory, transformed skeptics into believers, and created something that would outlast them all. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down." "You already haven't?" Stone replied. "The question now is what you do with the opportunity you've created." As the day's training concluded and the hangar began to empty, Maya remained on the observation deck, watching the sun set over the desert landscape that had witnessed so much transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to push the boundaries of what was possible. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Nash's vision had survived, evolved, and taken root in ways he could never have imagined. The impossible had become inevitable, and the sky itself was no longer the limit. In her pocket. Her fingers found the worn photograph of her mentor, and she whispered the words he'd taught her so many years ago. "Never let them tell you what's impossible." The revolution was complete, but the journey was just beginning. Epilogue. 2 years later. The International Air Show drew crowds from around the world, but the real attraction wasn't the vintage warbirds or the acrobatic displays. In a restricted section of the airfield, representatives from 23 nations watched as pilots demonstrated capabilities that redefined the very concept of air superiority. Lieutenant Colonel Maya Rodriguez stood with her international team of instructors, watching as a mixed formation of American, British, Canadian, and Australian aircraft executed maneuvers that would have been dismissed as computer-generated fantasy just 3 years earlier. The Nash protocols, as they'd come to be known, had spread through Allied air forces with remarkable speed, transforming not just tactics but the entire philosophy of aerial warfare. "It's beautiful," murmured squadron leader Emma Patterson, the British exchange officer who had become one of Maya's closest collaborators. "Like watching the sky itself learn to dance." Maya smiled, remembering her first conversation with Nash about the poetry of flight. He'd believed that aviation was an art as much as a science, and these demonstrations proved him right in ways he could never have anticipated. In the crowd of observers, she spotted a familiar figure, an older man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his life in military service. General Robert Nash, David's father, had traveled from Colorado to witness the culmination of his son's work. After the demonstration, Maya found him standing alone near the memorial plaque that had been erected in David's honor. His eyes were bright with unshed tears as he read the inscription. Colonel David Nash, visionary teacher, pioneer. His dreams took flight in the hands of those who refused to let them fall. "He would have been proud," General Nash said quietly, as Maya approached. "He would have been amazed," Maya replied. "What we've accomplished here goes beyond anything he originally envisioned. The techniques have evolved, adapted, grown into something truly revolutionary." "And the investigation?" Maya's expression darkened slightly. 3 defense contractors are facing federal charges for conspiracy and murder. The FBI traced the sabotage back to a coordinated effort to suppress Nash's research. Justice is slow, but it's coming. General Nash nodded grimly. David always said that the biggest enemy of innovation wasn't technical challenge. It was institutional resistance to change. I'm glad you proved him wrong about that. "I had help," Maya said, gesturing toward the international team of pilots who were conducting post-flight debriefs. Nash's vision only succeeded because people were willing to fight for it, to risk their careers and reputations to prove that impossible was just another word for unpracticed. As the sun set over the airfield, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Maya felt a profound sense of completion. The scared transport pilot who had stepped off a truck at Falcon Air Base 3 years ago had become the architect of a revolution in military aviation. More importantly, she'd proven that one person's vision, carried forward by those who believed in it, could change the world. The demonstration aircraft were being secured for the night, their sleek forms silhouetted against the desert sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new innovations, new opportunities to push beyond the boundaries of what was considered possible. But tonight, Maya allowed herself to imagine Nash watching from somewhere beyond the reach of earthly concerns, smiling as his impossible dreams took flight in the hands of those who had refused to let them fall. The sky belonged to those brave enough to claim it, and Maya Rodriguez had taught the world how to fly. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.